Requirements are the requirements. That's the real world we live in. What's your best way of meeting those requirements and excelling in that environment?
That's David Kolbe, CEO of Kolbe Corp and attorney turned business innovator.
When people figure this out, when they learn those strengths about themselves, it's really liberating. All of a sudden it's, wow, this is who I am, and I don't need to worry about those other things because it is all about tapping into those strengths.
I'm Michael Mogill, founder and CEO of Crisp, the nation's #1 law firm growth company. I've built my business through practice, not theory. Crisp started with just $500 to my name and has grown to over 8 figures in revenue over the last few years, earning a spot on the Inc. 500 list of the fastest growing private companies in America. Our approach has been to take everything we've learned about generating massive growth within our own organization and help the country's most ambitious and committed law firm owners do the same for theirs. In each episode of this podcast, I sit down with innovative market leaders from the legal industry and beyond to learn from those who thrive in the face of adversity, challenge the status quo, and define what it means to be a true game changer. I sat down with David Kolbe to discuss the 3 parts of the mind and how Kolbe measures your strengths, why knowing and leveraging your strengths is crucial for both personal and professional success, and the future of work and AI's impact on cognitive assessments.
There are a lot of people worried, oh, am I going to even have a job? Is AI going to make me pointless? It'll change things, but I think it will also give people a little more freedom sometimes to operate using AI to help them, not just replacing them.
That's coming up on the Game Changing Attorney podcast. Before we begin today's episode, I want to remind you that we aren't beholden to any sponsors or run any ads on this podcast. This allows us to present all of our episodes raw and unfiltered. I'm not going to push any made-to-order meal services on you or try to save you any money on your car insurance. That being said, I have one small request. If you receive any value from this podcast, please give it a 5-star review. Pay the fee so we can keep this podcast free. All right, David, welcome to the podcast.
Great to be here. Thanks, Michael.
Well, I've been looking forward to this for quite a while. Obviously, our organization, we are big fans of Kolbe. I think at this point, we've done almost 10,000 of these assessments. And obviously, we'll get to what Kolbe is and what it's all about. But I think it's interesting. You actually started your career in law.
I did.
And I'd love to know just why didn't you stay there?
I am not one of those former lawyers. And as I like to say, I'm actually currently a lawyer, still a member of the bar. I just haven't been practicing for a long time. But I'm not one of those former lawyers who's like, oh, I hate it. I miss it. Like, I really enjoyed it. But it was really 2 things. I think the most important one was I got recruited into the company where I work, which was actually started by my mom 49 plus years ago. And it was late 90s, and the company was involved in all kinds of different things, especially the internet. So it was a really exciting time to come in and be part of an entrepreneurial internet related business. I also came in as general counsel, so I wasn't ready to leave the legal field entirely. We had been mostly, unfortunately, dealing with a lot of intellectual property stuff because some of our clients were stealing our IP. So I was able to keep doing legal work, but also get my foot in the door in just a different business that did lots of other things. So that was the main thing. The other one was a specific conversation really with one of the senior partners in the law firm where I worked, who I had even though I was like a baby lawyer, essentially, had a great relationship with him. And he was kind of saying, I have a great practice, make a lot of money. And he did. He's a very well-respected lawyer. He's like, I hear my friends who are out doing other things. And sometimes I wonder, should I have done those other things? And his doubt made me wonder, like, wow, he's at the top. Like, I can work for 20 years and get some breaks and work hard, and that's where I'll be. And he's wondering if he did the right thing. So it made me wonder a little bit, but I kind of still wonder, like, I think I would have loved it if I'd stayed being a lawyer in private practice.
And I want to transition to Kolbe because there's obviously going to be a lot of people listening that aren't familiar with it. And I'm wondering what the best way to give somebody a primer as to what this is, because there's going to be, I imagine, a lot of skeptics or people that have taken so-called like personality tests and even an IQ test. If you could give just even a brief context on what Kolbe is all about, maybe even just the fact that it's built on the 3 parts of the mind.
At its core, what we do is we help people understand their instinctive strengths about the way they take action that drive their success. So it's talk about the three parts of the mind, and you already hit the other two. We don't measure intelligence. We don't measure what most people think of as personality, the affective traits around your emotions, introvert, extrovert. And both of those two things can be called the cognitive and the affective, all kinds of assessments to do those things, everything from a spelling test in third grade on the cognitive side to IQ tests, SATs, LSATs, all that stuff. And on the affective side, Myers-Briggs or MBTI, DISC, predictive index, there are all kinds of them. And they're great. You need to know those parts of your mind. And we've all been taught about that, the thinking and the feeling part. But there's this third part called the conative, and this goes back literally to the ancient Greek philosophers. That third part is the way we take action. So what we at Kolbe do is Kathy Kolbe figured out, okay, this part of the mind that people have talked about but never really figured out how to measure, she figured out there are 4 what we call action modes. There are these 4 parts of conation, essentially, human behavior. And we figured out how to measure them. So super quickly, fact finder, follow through, quick start, and implementer. Fact finder is how we deal with gathering and sharing information. And on all of these, think of it as a spectrum. And in that one, it's, gathering and sharing. So some people, and I'm on this side of the spectrum, I need information. I do research. I get the stuff. If you ask me a question and I don't know the answer, I will put you off and try to get the answer. Whereas people on the other side of the spectrum are more like, hey, I know the top line information. Give me the bullet points. I don't need all the detail. You ask them a question and they don't know. They'll say, oh, maybe this. Much more willing to kind of guess. And it doesn't mean they aren't prepared. It's they don't know. Follow through is how we deal with systems and structure. So on the one end, I'll start at kind of the other end. The open-ended side of that is people who don't need closure all the time, but they take shortcuts. If there's a process and a procedure in place, they're like, I'll follow the first 3 steps and then I'll jump to the one that makes sense to me. The other end of the spectrum are people who create those systems. They create those 12-point plans and they actually work through them and drive to closure and get to the end. Quick start is how we deal with risk and innovation. So on one end of the spectrum are people who they do things differently just because that's who they are. You'll see them in your life where, oh my gosh, they've always got another idea and they're going for it. So, as lawyers, they might be entrepreneurial lawyers who start up another practice or, they're out there closing new clients rather than serving the ones they already have, maybe. The other end of that spectrum is the people who look at what's already working well and sticking with it. Let's not change things up that are working just to change them up. They're working. That's not their nature. They're stabilizers. They figure that out. The last one is implementer. And I kind of wish we could change the name because it's not about how we implement as in carry things out. That's more the follow through. It's about the tangible, tactile, 3-dimensional world. So on the one end of the spectrum are people who literally build things with their hands. They don't just talk about them, they put them together. The other end of the spectrum are people who more imagine. They create solutions they're not physical solutions. It could be writing, it could be thinking, it could be speaking, but they don't have to put it into creation. And on that one, let me give you an example. And this is from the work that we've done, but also happens to have been with a lawyer. I was working with an estate planning attorney, very successful, had a mid-sized private practice that he had started. And he's an initiating implementer. So that means he's the kind of person that builds, physically constructs. Well, that's not what an estate planning lawyer is doing professionally most of the time. They are not building solutions. Not with their hands, not that kind. So I asked him, how do you make that work? Where's your outlet? Because I knew he had to have some outlet. He said, you know what? The intellectual stimulation of the estate planning is great, but my passion is I build furniture and I go to shows around the country and I sell my furniture. It doesn't make as much money for me, but if I don't know what I would do if I couldn't do that. And that's a great example. He wanted both. He liked being a lawyer, but that was about kind of the cognitive side. It was also, frankly, some of it was the financial side. It was paid a lot better. But I knew he needed to find a way to use his hands and build and create that way because it's just part of who we are.
Yeah. No, I think it's so fascinating. Even if we could kind of go back, is Kolbe the type of thing that you can develop, or are you born with it as a sort of like luck of the draw? I mean, I know the answer, but I'm just curious because even we have, two children, my wife and I, two completely different.
Yeah. So do we get it genetically? It doesn't look like it because we've done lots of analysis of kids, including identical twins, and identical twins don't necessarily have the same Kolbe result. So it looks like it's more luck of the draw in that sense. I hope someday we'll figure out what the mechanism is for getting it, because the other thing we see is it doesn't look like it's a learned behavior. So it's different among your kids or between your kids, but it doesn't change over time. So we've done retest studies that look out with a span of 20 years, and it's quite stable. So it's not like, oh, I'm this way because I went to law school and that created my Kolbe result or my conative strengths. No. You went into that experience with your strengths and you brought them to that experience. And you're doing the same thing in your legal practice. So for good and bad, I think the great part of that is it's something you can count on that doesn't change. And when other things are a mess, they might be chaotic in your life, you can still count on this. The frustrating part is I think a lot of times we like to think of ourselves as a blank slate. Like, I can do anything and be anybody I want. And in many areas, that's true. But what we've seen is your conative strengths, these instinctive strengths, don't change. So don't fight it. You don't need to change them. I mean, you are amazing the way you are with your strengths. The trick is to use them. Do more of what you're great at and worry less about the things that aren't a great fit for you.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm glad you mentioned them as strengths, right? Because every Kolbe, it's a strengths-based assessment. So meaning that if somebody has a certain Kolbe and they wish they had, I don't know, more follow-through, right? So they could organize better, or higher quick start so they could deal with risk and uncertainty and be more comfortable. I think it's important to state that it's not that you can't navigate those things. It's really, it seems like it just requires more energy.
Yeah.
Is that a good way to look at it?
That's a great way to look at it. And a couple things I want to focus on that you mentioned. First is that word can't. Just because I am an initiating fact finder, that doesn't mean I can't simplify and bottom line things. Part of that is using my intelligence. Like if I'm working on a project and I need to get to the bottom line and just, take a lot of stuff or simplify it, I can do that. The trick is if that's what I'm doing all the time, it's going to be really stressful for me. I am going to have to work harder. And here's the second part, the key in. It's about the energy. So if you think of a task, and hypothetically speaking, let's just say, on average, it takes 10 units of energy, whatever that might be, for a person to do it. If it's a task that really doesn't suit me well conatively, so you were mentioning follow through. So as I said before, I'm the open-ended adaptable. If this task is really structure oriented and it's, hey, David, here's a bunch of stuff and you've got to put it into a system and a plan and a sequence, and then you've got to follow that through to the end. If the average person does it with 10 units of energy, I can still do it. It's probably going to take me 15 units, maybe 20, 30, I don't know. And I mean literal energy, and people forget about the fact that your brain is a machine. I mean, it is the more powerful than any computer still. It works very differently than most of them, but it uses energy. Your blood takes energy to your brain, and when your brain is working hard, it actually uses more calories, it uses more energies, just the same way as working your muscles out. And people forget about that, and they think they're just talking metaphorically about, I drained my energy by working hard today. No, you really did. You used more of your energy. So I can do it, but I use up that energy. And some of it is also that metaphorical energy. You just get more frustrated. Like, it's not in your sweet spot when you're doing something that doesn't fit your talents well. So you do it because you have to. None of us have lives where we can just only do those things that fit perfectly 100% of the time. You work toward that. But, I think about myself, I mentioned before when I was a baby lawyer, when you're just starting your practice, whether it's private practice or you're working in a firm under somebody, there's a lot of stuff you have to do because of those outside pressures. You don't have the freedom. And I know this as an entrepreneur too. When you're in that early phase, you, Michael, can't say, I'm not going to be at all initiating follow through and make sure that we send out invoices and get paid. When you're the only person doing it, you have to do it. But the smart people learn really quickly Well, sometimes they're smart. Sometimes they have a good mentor, or they get the resources that teach them this is a good way to do it. That's the first thing you should outsource. If you're like me and like you too, where that's not your forte as the systems and structure, then hire somebody. I mean, that's outsourcing. It's just not you. So there are tons of solutions to it, but it's not that you can't do it. It's just you shouldn't spend your time on it.
Yeah. I mean, I see this happen all the time with so many of the law firm owners we work with, especially many of the founders themselves. A lot of them are high quick start. Some are very low follow through. And if they're ever tasked with something like creating processes or writing processes, it's exhausting for them. And in fact, they vehemently almost avoid it and never do it. And I want to mention this example because this will highlight another question, is that I think many of them don't even realize that there's human beings in this world that love writing processes. Like they get energy from that.
Yep.
And one of the best things you can do is find one of those people and delegate that to them. So I think it's interesting in the sense that many of us believe that everybody thinks like us and works like us, or if somebody is, let's say they're struggling with a particular type of task, there's something wrong with them. What would you say to that?
I love that. And frankly, I mean, this will sound a little cheesy, but I think that's part of the genius of CRISP, because you guys understand that and you can show your clients, okay, not just in concept, this is what you should do, but here are the steps to make it happen. I think of somebody in our office, so it was all about process. We were going through, it's called EOS. I know a bunch of your listeners know of it. We run on EOS, and part of what you do when you do that is there's a phase where you're supposed to document your processes and get them followed by everybody in the company. And we were pushing back on this, or dragging our heels is better. We weren't pushing back. It just wasn't getting done, because really at the leadership level, we thought one of us leaders should do it, but it was not really in any of our wheelhouse. And we had to learn, and this is part of what we do, is help people understand this, but kind of like the cobbler whose kids have no shoes, it took us a little bit to realize, oh my gosh, we have the perfect person for this. And when we told Nicole, we want you to lead this project, and it's a significant project that's important to the company, she was so excited. She's like, really, I get to do that? And the rest of us was the reminder of exactly what you were saying. And honestly, part of the biggest joy that I get doing what I do is that sense that people have on both sides. So it's telling those Nicoles of the world, you get an opportunity to do what you do best and at a higher level. And on the other side, it's telling people you get freed up and you don't need to feel guilty about this anymore. This is not like I feel bad making Nicole do this, because not good for me. So our default, most of us, is, if it's something that is going to stress me out and I don't want to do, I feel a little bad getting somebody else to do it because now they're going to be stressed out. And absolutely not. And when you get those two people collaborating, because they're different, they've got the diversity of talent. It's not just addition, like, David does 10% and she does 10%. It's a multiplication, and you get so much better results out of that and grow faster and more efficiently.
And I want to talk about both the business and the personal case for Kolbe. But when it comes to, I know a lot of people, when they first start integrating Kolbe, it's from a hiring standpoint, right? They use this as a way to be able to align the types of candidates they're looking for with the roles themselves, with the idea that their teams can operate just more efficiently and harmoniously and just honestly more effectively. How does Kolbe help in terms of navigating hiring?
Yeah. So it's actually pretty straightforward, because as you were describing, the first part is, hey, understand the role you're filling. And we've got a process for doing that makes it really easy. It's surprising how often people skip past that step. I mean, not just with Kolbe, but just in general with hiring. It's like, I have this open position, we're hiring a paralegal. And they just assume, it's just the same as it's always been. No, take a little time, figure it out. And whatever that process is, maybe write a job description, look at the tasks that are there, interview a couple of people in-house to figure out, what's happening. But then the next step, and a lot of that often is already done, but the next step is going beyond just to look at what tasks does this person do? And it's asking yourself, what will drive somebody's success in this role? So sure, they got to check that box. That's the task. But what does kick-ass look for this job in this open seat? And then you think of that, and that's kind of what we help from a conative perspective. What are the demands on that job? The rest of it's really pretty easy. You just get those candidates to take a Kolbe index. You look at those two and how they compare. And our approach is basically to say, look, they need to be good enough. You still need to look at all those other things. So cognitive, for example, if you're hiring a lawyer, you want a smart lawyer, hopefully, maybe somebody who's got experience if you're hiring at that level. Of course, that's important. You don't want to only do the conative. Nobody would really even think of that. So as long as there's a good enough fit, and there's always going to be some flexibility and variability in that job. So that's really the process. Analyze the job, look at the candidates, match those two things together, and you just get advice. Don't look at these people because they're not likely a good fit. These people you should move along in the process.
So I want to talk about something interesting that happens on occasion. So someone's hiring and they come across a candidate. Let's say, for example, they're hiring for an operations role, whether it's a practice manager, something like that, right? Somebody that would be doing a lot of just organizing systems, creating structure, that, just ensuring things are getting done. And they come across somebody that was a practice manager at another firm, and they're like, look, great resume, great personality, but then they take the Kolbe assessment and they come back with a 2 follow-through. What are your thoughts there?
So the first thing is, okay, I admit usually for the top line, what you're describing in the role, because you said it's process-oriented, 2 and follow-through doesn't sound like a good fit. I would want to go through the process of getting the more full picture of, well, what about all the parts, not just follow-through? But yeah, it's an interesting, the problem is, so let's assume they're clearly not the right fit. I think that's kind of what you're implying.
Well, I look at it more from like a probability standpoint, that they may not be in the right role, but they don't know it.
Right. Well, maybe that's why they're looking for another job and sent their resume over, even if they're still in that role somewhere else. Maybe it's really stressful there, and they're thinking, oh, it's stressful because the managing partner, there's a personality clash. Maybe. It might also be because, you're really smart and you're really diligent, you're a committed person. So that's the affective side. So you're making it work, but it's just hard for you because, again, it's not a can or can't. The problem is if that's what's going on where they are and the same situation's going to repeat when they come to work for you, they're going to have that same stress. So maybe for 6 months, they get somewhere new, they're energized by that. But if it really is all about systems and structure and putting them in place and following them and making sure others follow them, it's not going to work long term. They're going to get burnt out. So, it really stinks. At least it feels terrible when for that person, you tell them you're not getting the job because you're not going to be a good fit, but you're actually doing them a favor. If you bring them in and they're miserable after 6 months, even if they're doing a good job, but it's just a way too much of a grind, that's not a good life to live. They need to find a better situation. So it's actually good to know that ahead of time and avoid the problem.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And I look at Kolbe as, honestly, it saves you a lot of money, to candidly, just from hiring mistakes that you would have otherwise made. Ever since we started implementing Kolbe, it's you find that if you can find a great person, but also the Kolbe aligns, and obviously there's the cognitive element and the skills are there, right? It's like a match made in heaven, and they're excited and they're engaged. And coming back to learned behaviors, it's not to say that somebody can't do something. Like, for example, I'm a 1 implementer, and I didn't know this about myself until, my wife and I had first met. So when it came to like household tasks, like, building furniture, mounting picture frames, I would always feel inadequate. I'm like, man, this requires so much energy. Why am I just not good at this? And then I like other people that they didn't even need the instructions, and they love assembling furniture, and they love, fixing toilets and, that sort of thing. So I could still do it. It just, for me, it was exhausting. Right. So I think it always comes back to that, from the standpoint that it's not that someone can't perform the task. It's just they're probably not going to get a whole lot of energy from it, and they're not going to be excited. And again, I would even relate this to, we see people in sales roles that are high quick start, and they can be on calls all day long, and they're just, they're energized at the end of the day. And somebody who could be, let's say, low quick start could be in meetings where they're having to do a lot of brainstorming and idea generation, and they're exhausted after 30 minutes.
Yep, absolutely. And getting back to your example for yourself and the implementer, that's also one where there's some societal baggage. There's a little bit of a bias of, the stereotype is, well, guys should be initiating implementers, kind of. They should be fixing cars or putting them, not even fixing them, maybe building them and doing those physical things. Not necessarily. We don't see a difference between men and women in their Kolbe results. So for you, that kind of almost pressure of, well, if you're a real guy, you're going to be out there building stuff. No, that's not true. And so that would have been an added thing for you to kind of feel that, I guess I'm supposed to, why isn't that something that drives me and that I just naturally do? But you don't, and it's fine.
Knowing your Kolbe and understanding your Kolbe it's invaluable. I feel like someone should know their Kolbe as early as possible, like kids and just early childhood. I know there's that Kolbe assessment, but can you speak to the benefits of knowing and understanding your Kolbe and how you can leverage that just in personal relationships, in business, et cetera?
Yeah, and actually, since you talked about learning it early, let's talk about kids a little bit. Whatever age you do it, but the reason it's great with kids is they learn it early, so they learn to understand. And our approach is, look, this does not mean, so let's get back to the follow through. Just because you are an open-ended, not systematic and structured person, you don't teach the kid, oh, you're a 2 in follow through, so you don't have to turn in your assignments at school. Absolutely not. The requirements are the requirements. That's the real world we live in. What's your best way of meeting those requirements and excelling in that environment? Don't set that kid up the wrong way. Set them up the right way so they're more likely to succeed. So when the kid learns, there's nothing wrong with you for being the kind of kid that forgets to, like, this was it for me. In grade school, I didn't remember, and it wasn't a cognitive thing, so it wasn't remembering. I just didn't put the heading that the teacher wanted. It's like, oh, you're supposed to put, the date and your name and the teacher's name and the subject, whatever. I would just maybe do that, maybe not. But I remember I had a teacher that's, if you don't do it, you don't get any credit for that homework assignment. So now I'm motivated because I didn't want to get no credit. And my mom was able to say, hey, I know this isn't natural for you, so here's what you're going to do. You're going to open up your notebook. I'm going to sit here with you right now. You're going to do that on every single page in your notebook. So when you do the homework and turn in, all you have to do is remember to put the date, and the rest of it's there. And if you forget the date, maybe she'll give you credit anyway because she got what she really needed. So you learn those little tips. But what we see over and over again is when people figure this out, when they learn those strengths about themselves, it's really liberating. And I think, you probably felt that with your initiating quick start. All of a sudden it's, wow, this is who I am. And I don't need to worry about those other things where I've felt maybe I should be more like that, because it is all about tapping into those strengths. So whether that's a kid tapping into them or whether that's an entrepreneur, and, for the lawyers, I think especially the initiating quick start lawyers, and I know, there are lots of people listening, and most lawyers, frankly, are not initiating quick start, but I think your clientele skews more that direction. And early in their careers, it was, they probably felt reined in, especially if they started out at somebody else's firm. Hey, you're coming into our system. Don't come up with all kinds of ideas. We do not need you to recreate things here. We've got a successful structure. We just want you to work. Do good work. Not like you're just a cog. I mean, you're a professional. But that's a difficult thing for initiating quick start because they do have these ideas and want to change things and do things differently. And when you get the freedom to do that, it's a great experience.
Oh, absolutely. Now, I will say on the converse, there are some pitfalls with it, right? So we work with a lot of business owners that are initiating quick starts, high quick starts, some even as high as like 10 quick start. And essentially give you an example. So we had a firm owner years ago when we first started working with him. I mean, he was at a point where he was just considering just retiring and leaving the practice of law altogether. And his frustrations were that, I've got all these things that I want to do and I've got all these ideas and I always share them with the firm and it seems like nobody, there's no execution here. Nothing's getting done. And I mean, we did a Kolbe onsite with him and, it turned out he was high quick start. All of his support people, they were high quick start. Everybody was low follow through. And right there, you can figure out exactly why, right? So I find that if you're a very high quick start, meaning you're ideas, how you navigate risk, uncertainty, et cetera, one of the best things you can do, I think, to have a joyous life is to surround yourself with the complementary skill set of those that are perhaps not as high quick start, but maybe high follow through, some fact finders, just to be able to balance that out. I would say that nearly a good portion of our leadership team, I mean, I'm the quick start, but many of them are leading follow through. And they love that, right? So sometimes you don't want to have like 5 idea people in a room because nothing will get done. And at the same time, if everybody is just systematic and process oriented, then you're going to miss that, that visionary element, if you will. Can you speak to some of that, just the complementary skill sets?
Yeah. So we've done research with a couple of different universities and looked at hundreds of client engagements where we do this to look at what's the pattern of teams. And the first thing I got to say is it's the kind of team that operates cooperatively. Think of it as basketball team versus swim team. Swim team, you go out, you swim your race, you get points for the team or not. And, there's no interaction. Basketball team, we are working together. It's flowing. So in a team like that, and most work teams skew more toward that direction. Not always. You mentioned salespeople. A lot of sales teams, really, it's a swim team. They hit their numbers. They're not cooperating with the other salespeople. Sometimes they're directly competing with the other salespeople. But what we looked at with those cooperative teams and what we found is that they need a mix of talent. They need conative synergy. So as you were describing, if everybody on the team is initiating quick start, you're going to have some blind spots. Like, okay, what about the people who stabilize? What about the people who will naturally stand up and say, that's crazy. We don't have the capacity to take on that new idea. We're going to lose money on it. We need to do X, Y, and Z instead. And I don't know who's right, but you need somebody to challenge it and naturally take a different approach. You need those initiating follow-throughs to create systems and structures. You also need those preventive follow-throughs to prevent things from becoming overly bureaucratic. So nothing really gets done efficiently. It's just so many steps. So that's what we've seen over and over again is you need to have people across the spectrum in all four of those modes when they're working together, and you get better results. Again, we've seen university studies and it's hundreds of clients.
What about on the personal side? I know a lot of people, then they start, first leveraging Kolbe, they use it in the business context when they're, aiming to build a better team and increase synergy in the workplace. But I found it just as valuable, if not more, on the personal side as well.
Yeah. I love those applications. Like, I love that you and Jessica both know your Kolbe results and that helps you and, kind of navigate your personal life. It's really, if you think about it, the same kind of thing. The key is understanding, knowing each other's strengths, basically. So there's not one, we don't tell people, oh, here's what you should look for in a spouse. It's about who is your spouse and then understanding that so that you guys work better together as a couple. We don't tell you, here's the one model to use. But for example, with me and my wife, so I talked about my follow through, and we have different tools, but one of the things that we looked at, not surprisingly, we looked at all this stuff before we were married because it's part of what I do. Not only are she and I very different in follow through, but we also figured out that she really wanted a husband who was more of a systematic, structured person like her. Okay, well, that's what she wanted. But fortunately for me, she fell in love with me. And that was strong enough to say, okay, well, just because I kind of wanted that, here's who I have. And we can talk about that difference and we can figure out, and because we care about each other, again, this is an excuse for me to just say, hey, sorry, Pam, but I'm not going to do those follow through things that you want me to do. But we can talk about it. I can ask her, okay, what are the most important ones? And we've been married for 28 years, so I don't even need to ask her anymore. We know those. And if they change, she'll tell me. But we can have that discussion and understand this is what's going on. So if she gets frustrated with me because I'm not finishing stuff, she can tell me. And instead of just making it I'm mad at you, it can be almost like you can approach it with humor. Oh my gosh, David, once again, your follow through has come through. But hey, this is really important to me. And she can tell me ahead of time. And I'm smart enough to know, oh my gosh, you told me ahead of time, I really do need to focus on this one. It's not can or can't. I don't care if it's going to take more energy. This is important to my wife. So I'm going to operate that way. But she also knows she shouldn't expect and shouldn't try to make me do it that way all the time, because that's not helpful either. And then the last part, and using that as an example, is, so we have 4 kids. They're a little older now. My youngest 2 are still in college, but the older ones have graduated. But when they were all little, and with her sense of structure and order and planning, she would have plans. And, this is what we're going to do for the weekend or a day or whatever. Well, little kids mess that up. So I no longer was the bad guy for not doing the follow through things that she was hoping for. They were doing it. But I knew this is also, again, because we care about each other and we want to make our family life work, I would know, hey, when the kids mess up the plan, it's not my role to say, hey, Pam, you need to fix this. You're the planning person. It's my job as the person who naturally operates well when there is no plan. I need to step in. I just create something, make something up. That's just part of what I do. And we have a better individual relationship. We have a better relationship with the kids because we understand those things about each other. I asked her one time, what's the biggest benefit of understanding this about each other? And she thought about it and she said, well, I don't want to kill you. And I'm like, yeah, okay, good. That's a benefit. But I think what she meant was if she didn't know it, those things like in followed through, and it's not just there, like also my initiating quick start, and she accommodates that, but she's not at that same level. They would just frustrate her so much because she wouldn't understand where it's coming from. And when I asked her actually to follow up, okay, that's funny, but let's go one level. What do you really mean? What she meant was she would have taken it as I didn't care or I don't love her enough to do it the way she would do it. And she realized it's not about that. You are who you are, and we'll make it work.
Yeah. I've heard you say before, and I love this, is that Kolbe didn't stop you and your wife from arguing, but it gave you the language to fight smarter.
Yeah. Yeah. And turn some of those things that there's still disagreements or frustrations, but they don't have to be fights in that big sense. I mean, you got to deal with them, but yeah, it's way more constructive.
It's fascinating. I think back just the importance of this awareness piece. Not only does it create a degree of empathy, but it's almost like you can call on your partner's like superpowers. So even like in small things, for example, like something that comes up in pretty much every relationship is deciding where to eat. Jessica and I are very complementary. So she's very low quick start, I'm high quick start. And I've learned that asking, hey, what do you want to eat for dinner tonight is not a great way to approach things. I'll just say, hey, let's do Japanese or Mexican, right? Like, two options. And if she can't decide, I'm like, all right, great. We're going Mexican, right? For example. Another example years ago is we went to Greece and we were on the island of like Mykonos. And at the time, they didn't have, like after a certain hour, I think it was after like 8 or 9 p.m., they didn't have any more like the taxis would stop running on that island. So we went out to dinner, and after 9 p.m., it was like, well, how are we going to get home? But she knew, okay, this guy's high quick start, he can figure it out. And I found some locals and I convinced them to take us back to the hotel, right? But I think it's just, and it's similar with her when it comes to any sort of like just organization and just keeping things like just on point. I lean on her and she does a marvelous job of that. So it's great to be able just to call upon those strengths.
Yeah.
And both personally, even in business.
Yes.
Right? So we've been in so many situations, even as a leadership team, where let's say we're at a point where like, you know what, we need some ideas for how to approach this. Maybe we're brainstorming, and we will go down the list of people. I'll see who the high quick starts are, and I'm like, bring them in the room. Once it becomes an operations or process discussion, let's bring in the follow-throughs. Or if we're talking about a whole lot of research, those are the people that are focusing on, the fact finders will focus on that. It's great to know where their strengths are. Anyway, I will say that it's both business and personal. It's been extremely valuable. How else have you seen people leverage Kolbe?
I mean, since it drives everything you do, I mean, it's not, I mean, you kind of covered most of the waterfront with business and personal, but think about the other things you do. So if you're involved in nonprofits, it's same thing. That's more analogous to business because you have kind of that structure and organization. I actually want to drop in one story that I was thinking of when you were talking about you and Jessica. Clients of ours were telling me a story. So husband and wife, it was his 40th birthday. She's the planner, the initiating follow-through planner structure. He's more open-ended in the follow-through, so he doesn't need to follow the plan. He's also the quick start, like, hey, I want to try something different. And they were going to go on just the two of them, so they weren't going to bring the kids on a trip. And she was saying, okay, honey, I'm going to plan the trip. What kind of trip do you want? And he was a little sheepish about it when he was telling me this. He's just like, she's amazing at planning the trips. And, she's so good at it. And I always know what the itinerary is, and kind of what you were saying, there's always going to be the transportation at the end of the dinner. She won't have left out that detail. But what he told her was, I really just want a trip that's not all planned. Like, I love that you do that, but we do that so much. And with the kids, you kind of have to. I'd love a trip like we used to take where, it's just whatever. So can we go to Europe? Can we go to Italy? Because I love Italy. And let's just do whatever. And she's like, I hear you, honey, no problem. So she just booked the flights there and back. And then on his birthday, they knew they were going to be in Florence. So she booked their hotel in Florence. The rest of the time, it was literally They had a rental car. They would just decide that day, where are we going to go today? So it was all great. So they're in Florence on his birthday. They're doing whatever they want to do, seeing the sights, and they're kind of foodies and like, okay, what are we going to do for dinner? Well, it's Florence. It's a busy place. You can't go anywhere. But anyway, he picked wherever he wanted to go. They go to the restaurant. They ask, well, do you have reservations? Oh, no. And they're like, well, so sorry. We are completely booked for the night. He turns to start walking out and she says, Smith, party of two. And they're like, oh, yes, Ms. Smith, thanks. Takes him. He's like, what? What are you talking about? And she said to him, okay, honey, I know you wanted the trip. I didn't want to tell you anything, but I also knew like it's Florence. Where we were going to go to dinner would be a big deal. I didn't want you to miss out. So I picked 3 places that I thought you would like, and I made reservations at 3 places, and that was one of the places you picked. But what I love about the story, number one, she said, yes, you get the trip that you want. She did the planning, but I love that she didn't tell him, because a lot of spouses fall into this trap of like, sure, honey, you can have your trip, but you know what? Because you're going to mess things up, I'm going to make reservations for us. And that sounds it sounds off. Like, I thought you told me we just would get my trip. She only stepped up when it was now what he essentially wanted. He picked the restaurant. Okay, maybe she directed it that way a little bit, but the way they told the story, it was all his idea. So, I love that. But kind of getting back to your question of what else, kind of anytime you're doing something where you are engaging yourself into action, understanding Kolbe's going to help. So your family, your work, your volunteer things, if you're coaching kids, I love bringing the same mindset to the kids. And you don't have to have them take a Kolbe index. You can kind of figure this out. If you step back and look at the way kids operate, you can at least see probably one of those action modes and think, okay, well, this is how I can get the most out of that kid.
I guess to some extent, or maybe a large extent, I wish that everyone knew this about themselves, right? That everyone was aware of their conative strength. I'm sure you do as well.
Yes, I do.
Because the alternative, which is, quite frankly, more common than not, the reality is that if you don't know this about yourself, you can go through your life, essentially find yourself in a role where you're just stressed out and exhausted all the time and not know why.
Yeah.
And feel like you're having to work 10 times as hard as somebody else doing the exact same thing. And just wonder, like, are they just that much smarter than me? Why is this so easy to them? And it's like the estate planning attorney that you mentioned, thankfully he has that passion. But imagine he knew that from the onset, maybe he would have gone in a completely different direction.
Yeah.
And potentially could be much happier.
Yeah. Oh, and we have those stories kind of in both directions. We work with people where they have felt trapped and then they learn this and they're liberated and then they leave what they were doing and pursue something else. Another favorite story, somebody who'd been really successful in his business, and it was a large property development and management business. So it wasn't his, he didn't found it, but he had risen to a senior level. But the company's like, hey, we're going to put you to the next level. You are going to be the leader of all of the property managers around the country. And he had been the best property manager they had. And we're talking like very large commercial, retail, multi-use kind of properties. So very large endeavors. And they thought, well, hey, you're the best one. So we're going to bump you to corporate and make you the leader of all those people. A, he hated his job. B, he wasn't as good at his job anymore. The company used us and they said, hey, we need you to work on this guy because it's not going so well. And we know it's not because he's incapable of doing this. Like, he was our star. And he was very honest. In both directions, he had kind of told him, like, if it keeps going like this, I'm just going to leave because this is not what I want to do. What we were able to do is figure out what was going on, and it was a conative issue. It was all about his implementer. So you took a guy who was very tactile, tangible. The way he operated those sites was walking around. He didn't stay in an office. He knew the people. He would go see the mechanical problems with the HVAC, all this kind of stuff. And he didn't operate at the level of fixing it. But for him, that was why he was so great at it, because there was that important physical component. So what we were able to do is, instead of this situation where, oh, he's going to quit or get fired, this very successful guy, we worked with them to craft a solution. It's like, okay, but they did have a problem. Again, the real world here, yes, they could put him back in his place of managing one, but then it would feel like a demotion. both for him personally and within the company, the signal would kind of be sent, oh, he's not so good, so we're demoting him. And they didn't want that. They wanted his expertise to help all those other property managers, but we were able to help them isolate the issues and figure out a way where he could do that. And the bottom line to it was, don't have him at the headquarters office. Have him go to all your other important sites and do it with them, show them the way he did it. That'll make it more successful. So yeah, sometimes it's totally changing. Sometimes it's getting back to what worked. Both of them are great stories.
Yeah. And when you know this stuff, because I imagine there's going to be some people listening saying, look, regardless of their conative strengths, like what must be done needs to be done, or they need to suck it up. And that's one mindset to have. But I would argue that if you can have not just the right person in the right role, but also have that role be very focused on leveraging their strengths, the entire organization is going to be more effective. Yeah. And as a result, grow much faster and probably be more profitable too.
Yeah. To me, it's about being more outcome driven than it is about process driven, or I shouldn't say process because that sounds like follow through. It's not about the way somebody does it all the time. So where I agree with those people is, hey, this has to get done. Let's take a law firm example. We've got incoming people who are, whether it's a call or a web lead or however they're coming to us, we can't ignore them. We have to get back to them promptly. Absolutely 100%. But there are different ways to do that. And there are different ways to structure the people who are doing that. So you get the right people. So you don't just say, well, it has to be done this one and only way. Well, what if somebody has a better way of doing it because it's the result that is not negotiable? That's the way you can really thrive.
Agreed. So David, as you look to the future of not just work, but also Kolbe, what are you most excited about?
Well, excited and not scared, but the whole AI thing, everybody's talking about what is the world going to look like with artificial intelligence. So from kind of a starting small, almost inward looking, we get to develop all kinds of new AI stuff, tools to bring what we do to clients, drive our own efficiencies. It's challenges though. I mean, we know that because it's a new way of doing it, and quality control is really important. And I know the lawyers are seeing this too. Sure, you can use AI, but you have to be really careful about what that output looks like. Humans still have to be involved in it. You can't just push a button and it's all great. That's really fun because it's a new challenge. And I think it will drive opportunities. Yes, there are a lot of people worried, oh, am I going to even have a job? Is AI going to make me pointless? It'll change things, but I think it will also give people a little more freedom sometimes to operate using AI to help them, not just replacing them. We're doing a lot of work to figure out what that's going to look like for us in terms of the way we communicate with our clients, deliver services, and also we have to figure it out because it is changing. I definitely don't know for sure where it's going.
Yeah. I believe everyone will have their own AI assistant. We have this, in our own organization. You can, whether it's ChatGPT or Claude or any of the other ones. But I'm very excited about it. I think the firm owners that are leveraging AI, it's a way to just probably increase output, and also I think move people towards more like creative, strategic roles. I think that's obviously very, very exciting. But more reason even for Kolbe in this sense, just from the standpoint of when you know what your strengths are, then you can leverage AI to get greater output there. So like you can use AI for brainstorming, for example, and you can use it for distilling ideas. And there's so much value there that I don't know. I mean, maybe in the long-term future, it's like the AI will take over and, the robots and the AI overlords. Yeah. But I don't know. I'm very optimistic about it. It's just the natural progression of how things continue to evolve. And I'm excited at the opportunity of how we will, create increased innovation, let's say, in the world, and probably increased value, to be honest.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I mean, there will be bumps along the road for sure, but I think it's got great opportunity.
So if, let's say for a law firm owner that's listening to this podcast today and they're excited, they're like, look, I want to start using Kolbe in my firm. Like what would be the next step for them?
Well, if you already want to use it in your firm, talk to Chris, because you guys, as you know, Michael, you're our preferred provider in the legal industry. You guys have so many Kolbe experts in-house who can help with that. If you just want to get a quick taste, you can go to Kolbe.com and take your own Kolbe A index. It's right there. But then, the follow-up is kind of, hey, check in with Chris and see how they can help you.
Yeah. Because the main thing we've seen, this is, really something you were very familiar with, is that, there's getting your assessment, right? And you learn that about yourself. And then you can even get assessments done for your entire team and learn that about them. But where the magic truly happens is when you actually start implementing this into the business. So for example, we have everybody's Kolbes are in Slack, right? If you go up to anyone's desk, you know where their Kolbe is. It's like the way in which everyone communicates with one another. I mean, even when we send out team-wide communications, we'll have like, okay, for the quick starts, here's the bullet points. And then for the fact finders, here's the, here's the long paragraphs, right?
Yeah.
And just seeing that, you give everybody a bit of what they need, and it just creates this level of just synergy that amplifies the, the output of a team.
You're preaching to the choir, Michael, of course. And I love the way you guys use all that internally, not only with your clients.
Yeah. Well, and I take it a step further. Like everyone in my life gets a Kolbe, right? Like our landscaper is a Kolbe, nanny takes a Kolbe. I mean, just everyone. And it's so valuable because now okay, well, how do we best communicate and how do we best work together? And when you know that about one another, it usually, leads to a better working relationship, quite frankly. But I think one of the biggest mistakes we make with any assessment is just if they just take the assessment and don't actually implement the insights from that they've learned and actually don't take it a step further and make it real in their, in their business or in their law firm in this case, then you're missing out on some of the biggest benefits that you can have from learning this stuff.
Yeah. And let me say two things about that. The first is, look, it does start with you. People sometimes feel selfish if they focus too much, but especially with, the law firm leaders that are listening for the most part to this, it should start with you and you understanding your strengths and making sure that you're in the best position to use those and you don't get crushed by all these other things that are a bad fit for you. But if it stops there, you're really doing a disservice. If you deserve the freedom to use your strengths, don't the people you lead also deserve that freedom? I mean, yes, it'll be better for your firm when you kind of unlock that potential, but just at their level, they should get that opportunity as well. So I really encourage people, start with yourself, and then when you learn what it means, how you operate, how you use it for yourself, then push it out. And yeah, not just the law firm, but to everybody in your life. I mean, I can tell you the very personal level, the next A result that I'm really excited about getting is my daughter's boyfriend. Like, we sent a coupon. I want to find out what he is. And it's not about, if it's a bad result, then you can't be my daughter's boyfriend. It's just, what is he like? Conatively, it'll be fun.
Yeah. And if he's a high implementer, then you know exactly who you're going to call whenever there's a, any sort of like construction project or something needs fixing.
Yeah, absolutely.
I love it. So David, as we come to a close, this being the Game Changing Attorney podcast, what does being a game changer mean to you?
It means making a difference in the things that you care about. So I'm not going to tell you whether it should be at home, at work, whatever, but it means changing your life, changing other people's lives.
I want to give a huge thank you to David Kolbe for taking the time to speak with us today on the Game Changing Attorney podcast. If you found this episode valuable, here are 3 free ways that I can help you grow your law firm. Number 1, download the first chapter of my book absolutely free at GameChangingAttorney.com. Number 2, you can shoot me a text at 404-531-7691 and I'll answer any question that you've got for me. And finally, number 3, if you can leave this podcast a 5-star review, it'll help us gain access to more influential thought leaders and bring their lessons learned here to you. For more information on our interview with David Kolbe, see the show notes for this episode in your podcast app or visit legalpodcast.com.